All right, so I wanted to record this video for those of you guys that are internal medicine residents or are looking to become residents in the field of internal medicine. And this is mostly for those of you guys that are preparing to actually take the ABIM exam, which is the American Board of Internal Medicine licensing exam, to actually become boarded in this field to practice as a hospitalist or a clinic doctor. Now, I am Dr. Nwosu, for those of you guys that are new, also known as Tochi. You can call me Tochi. And I wanted to record this video mostly to give you guys my experience and to give you guys my process and how I actually prepared for this actual exam. When I was actually in my second to third year of internal medicine residency, I did a little bit of research on Reddit, on YouTube, all over the place. And I found very limited information in what to actually expect and the resources that are best used to actually practice for this actual exam. So now that I have gone through the entire process and have taken and passed it on my first try, I want to give you guys my thoughts for this actual exam. That way it can become a little bit more of a smoother process for you than it was for me when I was actually preparing for this actual exam. First thing that I want to share are the resources that I actually use for this actual exam. If you guys have seen my previous videos on how to actually prepare for actually USMLE step 1, 2, and 3, you guys know that I prioritize heavy doing questions. And the 3 question banks that I ended up using were UWorld, AMBOSS/NEJM, also known as the New England Journal of Medicine, as well as MixApp. Now, in terms of how I would actually organize these 3 question banks in terms of how simulative they are of the actual exam, I would say that AMBOSS was a little closer to the actual exam, followed by UWorld and then MixApp. But that doesn't go to say that I wouldn't use MixApp. That's just saying that, a lot of the actual questions that are made up to actually be put in these actual question banks are really close to the actual exam, specifically AMBOSS. But I would still use those 2 question banks or even 3 question banks if you have enough time to actually prepare for the actual exam. I actually started preparing and doing questions during my late second year of residency into like my early third year of residency. And I will say that I started doing this because I had lined up a chief job for almost like right immediately when I finished internal medicine residency. So I didn't really have that layoff of time before starting a new hospitalist job or a clinic job to actually prepare for the actual exam. Just all I did was study for the actual exam. I actually had to work. So I didn't really have as much time to actually prepare for the actual exam during the end of residency. So I prioritized doing these question banks a lot earlier rather than later, so I would actually feel like I went through all the material to feel prepared for the actual exam. If you are a little bit closer to the actual exam, then UWorld has to be a question bank that you get through entirely, maybe even twice if you have that time. And I'll say that the way that UWorld is structured, the questions are very, very dense, very, very long, and although the questions aren't like that on the actual exam, sometimes you'll just get a singular line on the actual exam as opposed to UWorld, where almost all the questions are like huge paragraphs. So I felt a lot more mentally fatigued doing the questions on UWorld, and I found that I would actually end up having to use almost the entire time allotted for me to do those full 60 question blocks. So when I actually got to the exam, I didn't really feel I don't want to say I wasn't mentally pushed. I'll just say I wasn't very mentally fatigued as I finished each question block as I was when I was actually doing the questions during UWorld. So I think that the structure of that is actually more beneficial for you because going through residency, a lot of people aren't doing questions. So when they jump back into actually studying for the actual exam, they feel extremely tired and don't feel like they can get through entire blocks. So if you are preparing for this actual exam, do it timed mode and do it in the actual full 60 question blocks to prepare for yourself for the actual exam. On the exam, there's 4 different blocks, all 60 questions each. And this is a major difference that I've definitely felt that was different from USMLE step 1, 2, or 3, which in those exams, those question blocks were 40 capped as opposed to ABIM, which is 60 capped. And you definitely feel those extra 20 questions. So you definitely want to simulate the actual exam with the UWorld doing those full 60 question blocks, or else you'll feel like you are not having enough mental energy to get through the actual full question block. For AMBOSS, I would actually start. Okay, so let's take a step back. Now, a lot of people aren't going to go through 3 different question banks. I'm a little bit more OCD and a little bit more manic to actually study for this actual exam, and I felt a lot more anxiety. I've always been kind of like an anxious test taker for USMLE Step 1, 2, or 3. And that kind of carried over into, me preparing for the ABIM exam. And, those previous USMLE exams were a big deal. But for ABIM, this is the test telling you, can I practice on my own? Are you actually, licensed in this field? So I felt even more anxious and a lot more unsteady, preparing for this actual exam because, the stakes were higher. So I felt like I needed to get through all these question banks because I needed to see every single question bank imaginable, every single question imaginable to feel prepared for the actual exam. But a lot of people aren't going to have the time to go through 3 question banks. UWorlds, I felt like it was around 1,000 something questions. Amboss, which I thankfully got through my hospital. They had a subscription service to them, so they were able to allow us to have these questions throughout residency. And that was around, was it 2 to 3,000 questions? It was a lot of questions. Yeah, I think it was around that many. And then MixApp was, I believe, 2,000 questions. So that's 2, 3, 1. So it's around like 7,000 questions that you have available to you. So obviously it's going to be hard to get through 6,000 questions throughout residency in your last year preparing for the actual exam, which is why I try to advocate for those of you guys that are studying for this. If you find this and you're an intern, start doing questions immediately. And that includes either Amboss or MixApp. Save UWorld for the end of residency and a lot closer to the actual exam because those questions are very, very high quality. Not to say that Amboss and MixApp aren't, but these were actually the biggest questions that I needed to actually increase my mental stamina to actually take the exam on the actual exam day because they were a lot more denser and I felt like it really pushed me a lot more. If I were to redo this entire process, I would actually start doing Amboss or MixApp from day 1. And it's a little difficult because a lot of people save USMLE Step 3 to doing during residency. My program had us do it by the end of first year. I took it during my December of my intern year, so I was able to get it out the way. But as soon as I finished taking USMLE Step 3, I would start doing questions every single day and try to do it, it's a marathon, not a sprint method. So I would say do like 4, 5 questions a day for those first 2 years to kind of build up that, tolerance of doing questions, and it feels a lot more natural. And you'll see like there's like a general theme when you're actually doing these questions and some questions that they kind of favor. So you'll actually have time to be able to break all those questions down, why certain answer choices went wrong, what would make different answer choices the right one. And it also just helps you with your experience during residency to give you that foundational knowledge to get through residency. And it's also just a double positive that you'll feel prepared for the actual exam. The earlier that you start, try to start doing questions every single day and start building up more and more questions. And the closer that you actually get to the actual exam, try to simulate an actual full block. The main difference between the USMLE exams and then the ABIM exam for certification in internal medicine is that the question banks, instead of being 40, are actually 60. And you definitely feel that extra 20 questions, which is why you want to build up that tolerance of doing questions and always doing these question blocks in a timed mode. The closer and closer that I actually got to my exam, I actually just did back to back to back question blocks of 60. That way, when I actually got to my exam, I felt that I had the mental strength to get through it entirely and not feel fatigued. So that's what I actually did for my actual question review, is that I use UWorld, Amboss, and MixApp. So look into getting all 3 of those. And UWorld is a timed subscription as opposed to MixApp and Amboss, which because I got through my hospital, I actually just had it entirely for those 3 years, as opposed to UWorld, where you actually have to do it, I believe, in like a month, 3 month, or 6 month quality. time of range. So those all make a huge difference. So I actually didn't buy UWorld until maybe like 6 months before my actual exam. That way I'd actually have time to go through the entire bank twice. Now that's what I did for questions. In terms of content review, I actually prioritize using MedStudy. Now MedStudy is a newer resource that I actually started hearing about during my residency experience, which has been going on for many years, but they have been really upping the ante in terms of their quality of content that they present to you. They have it in flashcard services, they have it in question services. They actually have their own question bank. I didn't use their question bank, but they have one as well if you want another question bank to study from. And then they actually have video content review, which is the main way that I actually used content review with MedStudy. Now, the way that they are kind of built up is that they have it built and broken down between different subjects. So there was a cardiology video section, there was an endocrinology, there was a poem crit section, and you guys get the idea. And although the videos were very, very long, I think the cardiology one was like 4 hours or 3.5, 4 hours. The poem section was like almost 4 hours. Although they're very, very long, they are very, very high quality. And if you really like watching videos, for me, I really enjoyed Boards and Beyond, Pathoma, Sketchy back when I was all studying during med school. And this kind of simulated that same studying environment. So I just really, really appreciated having a video content bank, which I can watch at any speed that I liked. And this is also a resource that I'll do another video on, a resource that you should use throughout residency to study throughout the actual time, so you can feel like you have that good foundation. But in terms of actually studying for the actual exam, I would say that the entire video bank isn't like 20, it's got to be at least north of 20 something hours of content. So I actually watched it double the times over. And then the closer and closer that I got to the actual exam, if there was a section of information that I felt like I was very weak in, I would just go back to those actual videos and rewatch the entire section, and then go back and redo those questions again to make sure that I really, really solidified my knowledge down. So I really just use MedStudy's video diary to actually prepare for the actual exam. And then I'd really just heavily utilize all of those questions. So going through about 7,000 questions and preparing for the actual exam. Now that I've shared with you guys my actual resources that I use to study, I want to share with you guys my actual test day experience. Now, the test day experience, it wasn't too stressful, to be honest. I got there around 7 a.m. They have lockers for you. They showed you the entire venue. There was a bathroom right next to the entire venue. And it was a very quiet venue as well. And my actual test center was, I think, like on the 11th or 12th floor on like a high-rise building. So I had no issue in terms of hearing things outside, hearing construction, hearing loud noises. It was air conditioned, so I felt like I was comfortable. I wasn't too freezing. I just felt like comfortable in the exam. So the actual test day experience was good. Now, what I actually realized when I was actually doing the actual exam is that UWorld, yes, the question bank was very, very difficult. The stems are very, very long, but the actual exam, the questions were not that long, and they actually give you a lot more things that you don't realize that they give you. A lot of formulas, a lot of, baseline information, and having to calculate a chance vast, having to calculate, a score for Wells criteria or whatever. They give you a lot of that information in the actual exam. So that is something that I didn't realize that they would do for me, and it was very helpful for the actual exam. One of the things that I realized is that they give you 2 hours for 60 questions, and that was a lot of time. I didn't realize how much extra time that would feel like, because usually I would spend like maybe a minute or so per question. So going through all 60 questions with a minute each, you would have like an hour. And if you spent a little bit more time than that, I still had like relatively like 30, 40 minutes of break after I'd finish each question block from the actual time that they allotted me. So what I actually did, and it's something that I even implore for you guys to do, and it's a recommendation that I've given in my USMLE study prep videos, is that when you finish an actual question block, don't end it right away. Put your head down, rest, relax, and just recuperate from doing that question block. Don't go back trying to change answer choices, because you're going to screw yourself over more times rather than not, changing your answer, because usually your first answer choice is the most right answer. So don't go back changing answers. Once you answer it, move on. Also remember 2 forms of identification. Do not forget that, as well as your testing permit. Another thing as well that I really want to heavily emphasize is that the name that your residency actually submits to the ABIM to actually register you for the actual exam, make sure that exactly matches your forms of identification, both of them, because when they sent my name in, it didn't have my full name, and I actually had to submit a name change for the actual exam center. That way they would let me in. That's something that I almost didn't catch on time. Now that I've talked about my test day experience and my actual resources, I want to share with you guys my thoughts and things that I wish I did differently. And the biggest thing that I would say is that if I were to redo this entire experience, I would definitely start doing questions a lot earlier rather than later. And this, I would say, at least minimum by the beginning of second year, try to prioritize doing these questions, because there are a lot of questions and you really have to get through all of them. And you may think you have a lot of time to just do all these questions in the last half of internal medicine residency in your last year, but don't even really stress yourself doing that. Just prioritize doing these questions a lot earlier rather than later. That way you can really just feel prepared for the actual exam. And then the last thing that I'll recommend is having a way to review your old questions that you got wrong. I prioritize using Anki. It's a system that's worked for me throughout med school, and it's something that really helped me throughout this process for studying for ABIM. So whatever questions that I got wrong, I made them into Anki cards, and even questions that I got right that I didn't know why I completely got it right, I would make questions out of that too. So what I did is that I was able to review these questions daily throughout residency, and at a certain point even got up to 200-300 review cards a day. But it really just helped me keep accountable for the things that I got wrong previously, not having to just go back into UWorld, open up the wrong question, reread it again. It's just, here's a high quality flashcard, let me review it. That way I can do it in a fast paced setting and get me prepared for the actual exam day. Anki also has a way to put every single flashcard into one single deck, and I was able to go through every single one of them. And I think at that point I had like maybe 3,000 flashcards to get through. So I did that in the 3-4 days leading up to it. I did my entire Anki deck in all of those sitting settings, and that really helped me because it helped me see things that, although I was getting them right and I was pushing them out for months, I was able to see them before actually doing the initial exam. So it's like the cram feature in Anki, if you guys are familiar with it. So that was my experience, how I studied and how I prepared for the actual ABIM exam. For those of you guys that are taking it, I really want to encourage you guys to utilize some of these advice that I gave you guys in this video. And you guys got this. It's a stressful exam and it's a stressful process to prepare for the actual exam. But if you put in the work beforehand, I promise you, you'll pass it on your first try like I did. So if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and drop a like on this video. I appreciate you guys for watching this. You guys got this. Peace. Have a nice day.